Ой, у лузі червона калина похилилася. Чогось наша славна Україна зажурилася, а ми тую червону калину підіймемо, а ми нашу славну Україну розвеселимо.
2 years later, February 24th, 2024, Ukraine is still standing. That is why we can play that song. That is Andriy Krychuk of the famous Ukrainian band Boombox, as he was standing on the streets of Kyiv in March of 2022, singing the Red Vibranium song, which is known as the Ukrainian nationalistic song. Not the Nazi song, but the Ukrainian nationalistic. It was written in 1875. It became popular during the Ukrainian independence between 1918 and 1921, and has always stayed kind of underground until Ukraine got its independence in 1991. And because of the Russian invasion, it has resurfaced again. You can find it almost anywhere throughout the internet. It's the Matt Kwazaborski Show, calling you live and direct from Roslyn, Arlington, Virginia, just outside of our nation's capital. And yes, it is the second anniversary of the aggressive expansion of the Russian invasion that began in 2014. It did not begin 2 years ago. It was just the aggressive expansion of the invasion and, in a sense, the occupation of a sovereign, independent, peaceful nation, Ukraine. And today's podcast hopefully will be a little bit more on the positive sense than it was the other day, talking about their realities on the ground. And the reason I want to go positive is I'll go into that. But before we begin, it's the Matt Kwazaborski Show. First of all, before we begin, I want to thank Al Gore for inventing the internet. I'd like to thank Spreaker platform for hosting us, and all to the loyal listeners out there. And of course, my co-hosts that I have from around the world, including the great Dr. Ibrahim Al-Marashi. And when I talk to the Philly sports crew, especially shout out to John, Tom, Dave, and Jason. But it's been 2 years. Where were you? And for Ukrainians that live there, that have stayed, and some that have immigrated around that time and left the country, they all say that February 24th, 2022 is still going on. It's just been one long, hard, arduous day. One day, basically. It hasn't been 365 times 2. What is that? 728 or whatever it is. If you double 365, that's what it's been for Ukraine. And when you think about 2 years ago, I remember being in Brigantine, New Jersey, living there. COVID was still going on. Still wasn't much return back to the office yet for anybody, and my organization doesn't go back to the office at all. But long story short, I was able to relocate to the beach. And I remember watching on CNN the UN resolution right around 9:30 at night in the evening, East Coast time, 21:30 for all you people out there that like the military time on the East Coast. And the UN was issuing a sound rebuke to the Russians, the Russian ambassadors there, the Ukrainian ambassador to the UN. Then soon after that, the reports becoming in that Russia was attacking, sending bombs, sending planes, sending helicopters, not just to the area where I thought they would concentrate on, but to Kyiv, to the capital. And the whole goal was to land in Hostomel Airport, which is a military/cargo airport just outside of Kyiv. Now, I can say that because of the time living in Kyiv, I would always fly into Boryspil Airport, which was the main international airport. There's also another international airport within the city limits called Zaluni, but I never heard of Hostomel. And the Russians wanted to land there. It would have been easier if they were able to occupy the airport and to take Kyiv. That was the belief that was going to happen, and indeed the Russians did try to land there, but they could not take the airport. And that today, if you've seen any videos from Kyiv on an international level, you'll see President Zelensky with members of the G7, the Prime Minister of Italy, the Prime Minister of Canada, the Prime Minister of Belgium, and a few others that are basically in that airport saying this is where they tried to take Kyiv, and they were unsuccessful as a band of Ukrainian military men had defended the airport, had stopped the Russians' takeover, which basically did save the country. Like I said, if the Russians were able to occupy that airport, they could run their logistics operations there, and they weren't able to. And that is the key to the victory. There's great essays about the battle for Hostomel, the early days of saving Kyiv, and then what had become a logjam of Russian forces that were pretty much coming in from the north. My theory is that they crossed over Belarusian territory or Belarusian borders into Ukraine, coming down through Chernobyl. Chernobyl is located to the north of Kyiv, not too far away, and then Russian troops got stuck along the way, and eventually they gave up the battle, which saved the country. And this is why we could talk about Ukraine today, as it's still here. You know, I was going through my Twitter feed, I contacted a few Ukrainians that are in the country that I know of, saying, hey, thinking about you. If the predictions that Kyiv, the capital, would have fell within 3 days or 72 hours, and then Ukraine itself would have been wiped off the map about a month later, we would not be having this podcast. We would not be having the commemoration in support of Ukraine. I would not be leaving in about 2 hours to go to the mall here in Washington, D.C., where the Lincoln Memorial is, joining the rally that begins at 2 o'clock local time. 3:30, we'll march in support of Ukraine. Usually that march takes us from the mall up until the White House, while kind of round the gates of the White House, and then if it's the same as last year, we'll march up to the Russian ambassador's residence, which is not that far from the White House, to be honest, and just stand outside there shouting slogans in Ukrainian, in English, and just rally in support. And the reason why I want to make this somewhat positive is that if the predictions and the prognostications from the United States through the European capitals that Kyiv was going to fall, and we would not be having this rally, we would have accepted a new reality that Russia was that much closer to the border of Poland, to Lithuania, to Hungary, to Slovakia, to Romania, to Moldova. That was the prognostication. That is still the goal of Russia. That is still the goal, to wipe the geographical dimensions of Ukraine off of our map, off of the map, wipe it out. And there's all of these conservative pundits around the world, including here in the United States, that wouldn't mind seeing that happen. That would say that, you know what, just give it to Russia. This war is brutal. But what those people think is that if you're going to force the capitulation of Ukraine to Russia, it's not going to end. They don't understand Ukrainians and Ukraine. I saw this when I landed in Lviv in 2013, November 30th, 2013, when I was literally going to promote a program in the summer schools I was organizing in Prague. We had Ukrainians were part of our target audience for students to come, and the Euromaidan started that day. Like, it sparked up. What had happened in the capital, Kyiv, the night before, as I was sleeping in Warsaw, was that the protesters in the Maidan in Kyiv Square, mainly students, were attacked by then called the Berkut, which was a special forces operation similar to what I would say in America is like a SWAT team, but they were controlled by the government, basically, not the mayor of the city or a police commissioner. They were controlled by the president of Ukraine. That's similar to saying Joe Biden could release the SWAT team in my hometown of Philadelphia, and that just is not what is going to happen here. That's what the Berkut was. They had beaten the students, and the protests turned into, at that time, somewhat of an energy of positivity. But in my mind, after 3 or 4 days just in the western city of Lviv, I could tell like their freedom for Ukraine and the future of Ukraine is now or never. And it really hit me in terms of the fact that I'm an American. I'm living in Prague. I could jump on the train and go back to Prague, or catch a flight to Lisbon, Portugal, or go to, Japan or somewhere. And Ukrainians at that point didn't have the freedom of movement that they had today. They had to have visas to go almost anywhere. And then in 2014, I was like, the future is now or never. And I knew it was going to get a lot worse than it was going to get better. And it has gotten a lot worse. As we know, I'm not going to focus on that, but it's not over. Ukraine is still standing. Ukrainians are still standing. And for these people who either are Americans or South Africans or from wherever the world they may be, that just wants to see this go away and wash their hands, it's not what's going to happen on the ground. the occupation of Ukraine is not going to happen. It doesn't matter if there's some sort of capitulation. Somehow, if Russia takes over Kyiv, the forces on the ground, the Russians are not able to sustain what's coming at them. Ukrainians that I know, just the few that I know and have met with, but my observations from traveling there a lot between 2014 and 2019, these people, the Ukrainians, are not just going to lay down and surrender. There was the belief that Putin thought, oh, well, they're going to welcome us with open arms. Are you kidding me? They didn't do that in 2014 when they tried to take over Kharkiv, when they tried to take over Odessa and kind of partitioned Ukraine, dissect it, basically not in half straight down the line, but kind of in a diagonal, cutting through almost like a 45 degree angle is what Russia had wanted to do. Thought it would be able to take over these cities, take over the eastern part in Donbass, get all of the minerals, get all of the not Lithuanians, that's not the right term, but the lithium deposits that exist in eastern Ukraine, along with the coal and the gas and all those other things that made the eastern part of Ukraine rich with minerals and natural resources. That's what Russia wants to take over. They thought they could get to Odessa, where Odessa is a predominantly Russian, at the time, was a Russian-speaking city. Its mayor, the corrupt mayor, was found to have a Russian passport at the time. I believe he's actually still mayor down there. They couldn't take it over. There was a brutal attack or firebomb in the city council of Odessa. It wasn't the seat of government, but it was closer. It used to have been, and there was whatever happened. No one really knows what happened that day in Odessa unless you talk to the locals. But Russia backed off whenever those 45 people and the way they were attacked, the way they died. Russia had just backed off. And the reason being is that Ukraine has to keep Odessa. Odessa is the jewel of this all, mainly not because of its beauty and not because of its potential for tourism, but its ports and its access to the Black Sea. And the success today of Odessa, while it was attacked a couple nights ago, is that Ukrainian exports of grain shipments are back up to pre-February 2022 levels. That, to me, is a huge success for the country of Ukraine and for the world. Able to get the grain shipments out there. The Ukrainians, with not one single naval soldier in the waters of Black Sea, have been able to sink major Russian warships, landing ships basically are the ones that carry the troops and the equipment, land on the shore, disperse them, then they're able to attack. They've been sinking these ships, and this is what has opened up the corridor. If you go back to 2022, one of the very first victories for Ukraine was the liberation of what's called Snake Island. It's basically an island that sits in the middle of the Black Sea that's a little closer to the Romanian border, and that was one of the first targets of the Russians. Russian warship, go fuck yourself. As you remember, the Russians that surrounded the island told the Ukrainian troops there that give up the island, we're here to take it over, this is Russia, and the famous words were, Russia, go fuck yourself. And it became a commemorative stamp and a saying like, the Ukrainians have a chance here, they have a fighter's chance at that time, and it showed the world that if they were able to stave off with that kind of animosity towards Russians and just to tell the Russians to go fuck themselves everywhere in the world, I think everywhere and around Ukraine, you knew that the Ukrainians were not just going to lay down, because laying down and capitulating is the word to being colonized again by Russia and to be slaves. And that's what they're like, would you rather be a slave or would you rather die fighting for your country? And that's the way the Ukrainian spirit is. That is the spirit that I saw on the streets of Lviv in 2013. Walking around, I was like, these people are not going to give up at all. They're not going to give in at all. And then as you see the resolve of the Ukrainians, so I went 2013, and then I didn't return to Ukraine for almost a calendar year. I came back in December of 2014. Back to Kyiv, and started the foundation of the Leadership Academy, the Lviv Leadership Academy, that ran for 2 summers in Lviv. And then we also had the organization lasted for 3 years. It's now been rebranded as the Neptune. We are excited to announce, me and Dr. Ibrahim El Marashi, we hope to return to Chernivtsi in the southern central part of Ukraine. Is considered the safest oblast or region in Ukraine, mainly because it lies on the border with a NATO country and being Romania. We hope to be there for a week this summer, and if it's somehow the security apparatus doesn't work, we can go over to the border of Romania with Suceava in Romania, which is sort of like the sister town for Chernivtsi, and it's where the University of Chernivtsi in Ukraine has sort of like a partnership with the university in Suceava. So that is what we hope to do. It'll be a week-long leadership, conflict analysis, sort of just not a camp, it'll be a school. And we're excited to go back there. So, but the reason that we did it in Lviv was just like that was the first time I had felt the Ukrainian spirit. We went to one of my alums from the Prague program. She was from Lviv. She was finishing up her studies. She had put together meetings for me in Lviv for the couple of days I was supposed to be there. Some happened, some didn't. She took me to what is the most touristic restaurant in Lviv. It's called Krivka. And Krivka is sort of like you walk inside to like an indoor-outdoor hallway where you saw stairs leading up, these old rickety stairs. And then we come to what looks like a door knocking on the basement. You knock on the door and you think you're going to the basement of some old apartment. Like, where is she taking me? This guy answers the door in a army helmet, has a fake or maybe a real machine gun. And he goes, Slava Ukraine, which you also hear is freedom to Ukraine, and you have to answer Heroyam Slava, which means glory to the heroes. And if you want, he offers you a shot of red Horlivka, which is one of the Ukrainian national drinks, similar to vodka. And if you don't have to take it, but if you take it and a red star apparently appears on your head, then you can't go down. You're a communist and get the hell out of there. But if you go downstairs, it's a bunker restaurant. It's literally like you're eating dinner or lunch in a bunker, like with these picnic benches, picnic tables. It's all very wooden. It's all, with Ukrainian heroes on the wall, but you're in like a bunker setting. And it's the traditional place that you take tourists. But I was there in December, and Yuliana took me there. Got traditional Ukrainian dishes, probably had some borscht, probably had some salos, some vareniki. I don't quite remember, but I just remember, the TVs that were on being broadcast was everything that was happening in Kyiv. Because like I had said, the Euromaidan was now just really jumped up to another level at that point. And by the way, it's not called the Euromaidan anymore. That sort of ended in February 2014, or the Revolution of Dignity. Now it's just a battle for survival. So anyway, not a lot of tourists were in Ukraine in December of 2013. If there were any non-Ukrainians there were probably people like me that were there on some business, maybe a few tourists, but you visit those kinds of places in the summertime. But just seeing on the TV what was being broadcast in Kyiv, and then hearing the waiters and the waitresses go scream with Slava Ukraine, and everyone answered back Heroyam Slava, but it was the look in their eyes. It was the look in the eyes of the waiters and waitresses. Like, this was not a touristically... They weren't doing this to please the tourist and show this is the part of Ukrainian nationalism. They were being serious, and they knew the fight that was ahead. They understood that, and for me, it really hit me there. Yuliana had left. She said she had to go visit her grandma, take care of her grandma, and I was like, look, I'm just going to stay here and take in this atmosphere. Didn't talk to anybody. It was watching TV, just watching people, and that's when it hit it to me that when Russia does come for Ukraine, which it sort of had done politically through Yanukovych, who had fled in 2014. At that point, we had no idea. Yanukovych was the president of Ukraine when I was there. He only had 3 months left to go. No one knew that at the time. But I was like, when Russia does come for it, it's not going to be as simple as laying down arms and welcoming the Russian Slavic brothers. It's not. Ukraine has had a long history of being colonized by Russia. Has fought these battles throughout centuries of occupation. The Soviet Union was an occupation. Before that, it was part of the Russian Empire. It had a little brief period of independence from 1918 to 1921 before the Soviets came in and incorporated it. That's what they would call it in the diplomatic terms, but really took it over. The Holodomor, the genocidal attack or policy on Eastern Ukrainians with the grain farce, like they were starving Ukrainians through government measures. Now, how were they doing that? They would make the farms they would put production quotas on these farmlands or these areas of grain that were just way above and beyond what they could produce. And the Soviets knew that, or the Russians knew that in Moscow, knowing that every little bit of grain the Ukrainian farmers would have had to give up for the great glory of the hero to feed their brothers in Siberia, where the ground is completely frozen, probably 8 months out of the year. The Ukrainians were going to starve to death. And then Moscow sent in officers who would then loot the homes of the Ukrainian peasant farmers, taking their potatoes, taking whatever grain they had there, taking their horses so they couldn't eventually eat horses. And rumors are that 7 million Ukrainians had starved to death in a period of 2 to 3 years. And no one really understood what the Holodomor was until Ukraine became an independent nation and the Soviet Union broke apart in 1990, 1991. And you just knew that Ukrainians were not going to lay down. And when 2014 happened, they didn't. Because that's what Russia wanted to do. It wanted to take over the eastern part of Ukraine, the Donbass, incorporate into Russia, call it the Novorossiya project, which is supposed to stretch from Odessa in the south central on the ports that I mentioned, all the way up and dissect the Ukraine from west to east, probably in a 45-degree angle, plus or minus, and pretty much cut Ukraine off from the seas. There's 2 major seas. We talked about the Black Sea, but there's also the Sea of Azov, which the sacked town city of Mariupol is based upon the Sea of Azov. And that was another important port for Ukraine to get out. They could defend themselves. It was a military port, but it was also more for exporting. There's the huge steel plant where they would make the steel in Mariupol and just ship it off and export it out and import goods and things just like normal seaports work. The Russians wanted to cut access off to Ukraine or cut off Ukrainians access to the seas. That would have pretty much made Ukraine, what was left of it, would have been a landlocked country, much like Belarus. It's a landlocked country, no access to the sea, and it would have killed a majority of the economy of Ukraine if they're not able to ship the grain out of the ports. They weren't able to import the goods that they needed for their people. It just would have cut that off, and eventually Ukraine would have starved economically, and eventually someone would have come along, much like the country of Georgia, that was beholden to Russia. An oligarch or something would have created a new political party and would have won over the political will of the Ukrainians and pretty much make it a de facto colony, much like Belarus is today. And unfortunately, the beautiful country of Georgia, where I've been a few times myself, and the beautiful people there, that they are pretty much, being politically occupied by a pro-Russian sentiment oligarch and his company. His political party called the Georgian Dream. And Ukraine was the same way from under former President Yanukovych when he was elected in 2010 until he fled the scene in 2014. The amount of corruption that was being done to fill the coffers of the political elite of Ukraine at that time, as well as the controlling of the media was beginning to clamp down, much how like Putin had taken over Russia. Yanukovych was going to do that to Ukraine, and it was going to side with Russia when it came to economic trade deals. Russia said basically at the time, you either pick the EU or you pick us. You can't have both. And Yanukovych at the time had campaigned that he would join the EU, and right when he was about to sign it in 2013 is when he rejected it at the last moment, because for the whole entire year, him and his cronies had been meeting with Russia. In Sochi, we're traveling to Russia, negotiating the way for Ukraine not to take the deal to join the EU. And Russia has always saw Ukraine, the country of Ukraine that we know, as part of its own. It doesn't recognize the Ukrainian nation, the political elites, Putin, Medvedev, whatever have you, the people that support this, do not see Ukraine as a viable country. They think it's some sort of CIA mass-created project, which it isn't. As we talked about, it had a brief independence from 1918 to 1921, from the end of World War I until 1921. It had that independence of it. Excuse me. And throughout its nation has always fought for its independence. It's not the same language. The customs are not the same. The religion, slightly similar, but there's more of a diversity of accepted of religious backgrounds in Ukraine than there is Russia. Russia is strictly an Russian Orthodox religion. It has a growing number of Muslims in the country that no one really talks about. In Russia, there's more mosques, I think, in Russia than there are in, the United States and the West combined. In Ukraine, out west where I was in Lviv, Orthodoxy isn't even the main religion. It's Catholicism. It's an Eastern Catholicism, so it follows a similar calendar to Orthodox, but isn't as what I like to call the Orthodox. It's old school. Catholic's pretty old school, but Orthodoxy goes way back to the year of 757, and then there was a schism between the two churches in 1054 that created basically the Roman Catholic branch of Christianity. Anyway, Ukraine is much more accepting. It has the Crimean Tatars are of Muslim descent. There are Greek Orthodox. There's a ton of Greek communities in and around Ukraine. Again, because of access to the Black Sea, trading ports, over centuries, Greeks would come to trade with the Ukrainians through the Black Sea, and then stay there, and create little communities of the Greek community there. And many countries of faith, and many countries and their civilians would relocate to Ukraine because of its access to the Black Sea, because of its soil. It has one of the richest soils in the world, creating the grain shipments around the world, the production of wheat. Ukraine is the largest producer of sunflower oil, which is used for many, many things around the world, not just in cooking, but in healing processes, and has been for centuries. And that is what Russia wants to take over. It wants to take over Ukraine's economy, incorporate it to its own, probably because Russia, what does it offer? When you think about, and this is more towards a European audience, but when you go into a supermarket in, let's say, in Prague, Czech Republic, my former home, you see products from all around Europe in there. Ukrainian sunflower oil to Georgian wine to French bread to Guinness beer that's been imported and imported from Ireland. You don't see anything outside of maybe a few bags of chips and vodka in the store that's actually Russian. Now there are ethnic stores of just that sell for the Russian population in Czech Republic that do cater to the Russian speaking audiences. But I'm talking about a normal supermarket, when you go into a Billa, where I used to shop at all the time, or a Kaufland, which I used to shop at all the time as well, you don't see Russian products being that readily available, or you can't find them if you do. What exactly is Russia bringing to the world besides gas and natural oil and war? I often wondered that. You could say, as an American, you talk about our military exploits. That's fine. You can and you should be critical of what the United States has done around the world. But when you go into your pocket and you call me on your iPhone, that's an American product. When you're drinking a Guinness beer, that's an Irish product, right? When you're driving a Skoda, your cars, that is a Czech product. Those are the different things that we have done in the West with the free market economy that Russia has never been successfully able to do, or has no will to do so. It just wants to occupy and create chaos. And that's exactly what the Russian government is doing. This is not an attack on my Russian friends. This is, unless you're supporting this invasion, then this is not an attack on you. It's an attack on your government. Much like when you would blame the United States, I didn't take it personally. I knew you were blaming the policies of George Bush, for example, or, you can blame the policies of Obama, who I think were in this area, has put Ukraine on the hot seat, I think, because of his failed foreign policy, Obama's failed foreign policy of the red line in Syria. It goes all the way back to there. But I think more or less the people listen to this podcast, it's mainly about the success that Ukraine is still here. It's still here. You shouldn't commemorate the anniversary of an invasion, the aggressive expansion of an invasion. There's not going to be, marches around the world for Crimea when it was annexed in 2014, which has been 10 years ago this time next month. But what we are celebrating, or acknowledging, I should say, is that Ukraine is still here and we still support it. And it's being held up by a handful of about 8 people in the United States House of Representatives. So let's go into that part of it. President Biden pretty much drew down all the weapon stocks that he could for now and gave to Ukraine. And these weapon stocks were not weapons that the United States would use in a conventional war. So if, a war, if we had to go fight a war just to defend the United States, we would not use these weapons. They were going to be decommissioned, unweaponized, if you will, and never be used again. Or you can send them to Ukraine, say, use these weapons as best as you can as possible, and defend yourself. And that is what basically President Biden in the United States has done. There's a spending bill that's on the House that's been sponsored by the Senate, that's been approved by the Senate in almost a 2/3 majority, that would give $60 billion of aid to Ukraine. Those that oppose Ukraine, these 8 people in the House of Representatives, maybe more, maybe less, they're just scared to go against their version of a czar in Trump, is that this $60 billion is not being shipped on a plane, right, in cold hard cash and delivered to the borders of Poland and Ukraine and shipped over the borders. No. This money is going to create jobs in the United States to produce the weapon stockpiles that we've been sending to Ukraine, to produce and get ready for our own defenses, to stock up if in case we have to go to Ukraine or to Poland or to the Baltic states or to Romania to defend it as NATO nations. That's what is being done. We're creating jobs with this. Yes, some money is going to Ukraine in the form of decommissionized weapons. They're also counting that $60 billion. Oh, this one missile system, the Patriots, cost $1 billion. That's $1 billion of the $60 billion, right? There is humanitarian aid going over there, and I think that's what a lot of the Republicans who are against Ukraine and its existence don't want to see going, is the humanitarian aid part of it. Like, spend it on our borders to secure the borders of between Mexico and the southern states, mainly of Texas, Arizona, New Mexico, California, and put up a giant wall. And all of a sudden, we're just going to construct a wall that's going to close the borders. And that has not been successful. It's not going to be successful, and it's not going to be implemented. In fact, the Democrats came up with the most ardent border security bill in the past 30 years that the Republicans flat out rejected. Why? Because they don't want the aid going to Ukraine. So the Senate said, let's decouple the Ukrainian aid. There's also a package to go to Israel and a package to go to Taiwan. Let's decouple it from the border. If you don't like our border policies, we'll go back and look at that border wall, but pass this. The Speaker of the House, Mike Johnson, who no one knew who this guy was until October, who's now the Speaker of the House, says, no, we want border security part of it. So they're going back on it. And then furthermore, they took a 2-week break, which they will come back apparently this week, and then our government's going to shut down and no funding is going to get out. President Biden can still send weapons over to Ukraine. He can still do it without the support of the House of Representatives. Now, the House, Democrats could call what's called a disparaging bill, which is a procedure in the House of Representatives that could still force the debate of a bill onto the floor, even though the Speaker will not do it. So the Speaker of the House, who's the third in line for the presidency, and that also gives you a little bit of idea of the power that Mike Johnson has, he can bring bills to the floor to be debated, or he can say no. And that's what he's saying. I was like, I'm not doing this based upon what the policy is in the bill. We're not doing this. Basically, they don't want to give the aid to Ukraine. If you go back to President Trump's campaign in 2016, before the election, before the Republican convention where he would have been nominated to be the Republican nominee, they were going to take out all aid and all mention to Ukraine in his policy and his bills. So this started in 2016, and again, it goes to show you that Trump's not going to support Ukraine. His people that have had 4 years to figure out how to get him back into power and create these draconian policies that he supports, which is basically to consolidate as much power as you can under the president of the United States or the executive office, they're not going to support Ukraine. So they took 2 weeks off not to force this vote, and then the government's going to shut down. I think it's going to cause chaos, and they're going to say, hey, President Biden, you couldn't halt this, and they're going to blame Biden. And that's the whole idea, because Trump, in his own words, in his dictatorial words, me alone can save you. I alone can save you. We'll be able to say, let's get this government back up and running, and this is the way the United States is going to handle all policies moving forward. Now, so this disparaging bill, In the House, you have to, it's just a majority of, it's basically a 50-50 split. In the Senate, for something to pass, has to be 2/3. So right now, the Republicans have a 4-seat advantage. Whether they're for Trump policies or not, they have a 4-seat advantage of something like 219 seats. The bill needs 218 to pass into law and to get to the president's desk. So what this vote would do was basically handcuff the speaker and force a debate on the House floor to provide aid to Ukraine. If we can get 4 Republicans to side with this, with the Democrats, the aid will pass. It will pass. They just need 4. And that's on the razor-thin margin that the world is being held upon and accountable for by the House of Representatives. Now, if the government shuts down, you have to negotiate ways to get it back up. And I think that's why Mike Johnson wanted a 2-week break, so we couldn't negotiate ways to get the government back up and running in a publicly facing manner. Mike Johnson was spotted at Mar-a-Lago, at Trump's whatever place down there, probably talking policy. Let the government shut down. How are we going to handle it? And it's ludicrous that the best economy in the world, the most successful economy in the world, the United States, government can shut down. That doesn't happen in other countries around the world. Their governments are usually dismissed. A lot of times in these parliamentarian democracies in Europe, the president is more of a figurehead. But one of the powers the presidents usually can do is dismiss their parliament or their version of Congress because of poor performance, poor polling, and then force early elections. That means basically these politicians, their government doesn't shut down. It's kept up and running with no changes basically until these new elections. But the government wouldn't just simply shut down. It just wouldn't happen. But in the United States, you can do that. And that's crazy to me. It's crazy to a lot of people who look to the United States as sort of some sort of model or beacon around the world. So if this vote gets pushed through, this disparaging vote, and 4 Republicans have the courage to go against Trump, because there are a number of Republicans who do not support Trump or his policies, but are afraid to lose their jobs and their seats, because they're going to become targets in their home districts to be, targeted, and to have someone who supports Trump to run against them when their election comes around. And by the way, the House of Representatives has to run for re-election every 2 years. So this is a huge year in terms of American democracy and global, the globe as the way we see it. So for those 4 Republicans to come forward and say, yeah, we signed the bill, it'll go to President Biden's desk. He will sign it, no doubt. And Ukraine will be able to keep on going and still be there and still be here next year when we have this. If the bill doesn't come through, we're not going to talk about that. There's reports in and around, that it's not that Ukraine wouldn't be able to defend itself. Its weapons systems would go down, yes, but the economy would also be in peril in the next couple of months. So let's hope that doesn't happen, because this country is at war. But what was great about today is scrolling through Twitter, not only seeing the marches for support around the world, in my former hometown of Prague, in Italy, in Georgia, even, the country that I already mentioned, because there are ardent supporters of Ukraine that are not in the government that will support and march with them. It's great to see, and that's what we're going to do on the Mall in about an hour and a half from now. It's great to see the support, because, like I said, if the predictions and prognostications that Kyiv was going to fall in 3 days, Russia was going to fully occupy Ukraine, wipe it off the map within a month after that, these rallies wouldn't be happening. There wouldn't be any support. It would have been just like, okay, this is the new world order. How do we defend the Baltic countries? How do we defend Poland and Romania, NATO nations? Because Russia has flat out said in written letters in December of 2021, roll back NATO to its pre-2004 status, or 1997 status, sorry. That would have meant all of the former Iron Curtain countries would not be in NATO anymore. The Baltics would be invaded and occupied by Russia, and my home country of Czech Republic probably would have fallen to some pro-Russian politicians at this point in a more ardent manner, because they knew that NATO would no longer defend them and itself. That's their goal. That's their goal, is to recreate the 1960s Cold War era of the world. And that is what Russia is trying to do, but do it in a way that's, aggressive. It's not afraid to do it. It just was not. I think everyone is surprised, including Russia, that, the war has taken this long and it's still going, and Ukraine for somehow is still on the map. Now, Russia does believe it has time on its side. We're not going to get into that. But I'm saying if you support Ukraine, do something, think about them. If you know any Ukrainians in the world, reach out to them. If you know Ukrainian communities that may have not been born in Ukraine but have family or have Ukrainian roots, reach out to them, and say, hey, thinking of you today, or just, hey, invite them for a cup of coffee. Take them out, grab a beer with them, depending how old you are and you listen to this podcast. Take them out to lunch. Go talk to them. Go visit a Ukrainian church. Do something to support Ukraine today, because what the people who are supporters of Russia, and I'm talking about it more to the Americans and the people in our government, people like Elon Musk, who are out there who say, hey, let's just end this, end the dying. As too many people are dying on both sides, it makes no sense. Russia can't lose. Ukraine can't win. Just let Russia go. Negotiate a peace along the borderlines now. Sacrifice the regions that supposedly are part of Russia now, in the south and the east. They don't realize what Russia is going to do to the citizens of Ukraine who defy them, who are already targeted on lists, and there's probably hundreds of thousands that are on these lists. We already see these camps that are being created in these filtration camps that have been created in the temporarily occupied parts of Ukraine. The stories coming out of Irpin and Bucha, suburbs of Kyiv. The stories that came out of there in 2022, when it was liberated around April, May, are just horrifying of what the Russians were doing to just normal Ukrainian citizens, not necessarily patriots of Ukraine or soldiers, just to the citizens. It is barbaric in what they had done to them. I'm not going to go into the details, but President Zelensky, I think, and much credit to him, and famous video that he published 2 years ago where he's standing in Kyiv in the front of the government. I'm still here. The head of the office of the president, Yermak, is still here. The prime minister is still here. This advisor is still here. We're here. We didn't run. We didn't flee. But when he went to Bucha, when it was safe, and there's no threat of Russian attacks, you saw the look of pain on his face when he heard what was being done to his citizens. And I think at that point in the whole world, just looking at Zelensky's face that day, you saw what is awaiting the world if Russia takes over. And these were being done to his people. And this is what alarmed the West. I think more so we have to defend this, because if they're starting to come to Ukraine and treating the Ukrainians, their supposed brotherly nation like this, what are they going to do to the Poles? What are they going to do to the Czechs, the Slovaks, the Hungarians? What are they going to do to, God forbid, if they make it out into, France or Germany? That horrifying accounts of what is being done and what's still going on today, by the way, just not in those areas. I'm talking about in the further the east, where the temporary occupied regions of Ukraine are. Torture camps are going on, the frustrations, the rapes, the looting, the marauding. It literally is still taking place. And we don't hear about those stories, so therefore it's not on our radar. But that is what's going to be done to the entire country if these assholes, these pro-Russian assholes who only see economic gain out of a Russian occupation of Ukraine and don't understand it's just barbaric. They're just as barbaric to me because they're allowing this to happen. They're allowing this to go on. They will allow it to happen, because it's a zero-sum game and the alpha dog always beats the beta. But you don't realize that the alpha dog is technically Ukraine. They're the alpha dog right now. The Russians are being beta right now. And they're being beta because they know they can't occupy Ukraine city by city, street by street. There is no way. Even if, as I mentioned before, a pro-Russian sentimental government somehow rose to power in Ukraine, much like it did in Georgia, there would be resistance upon resistance, and this war will go on for decades. decades. The Ukrainian people will not give up, will not give in. They do not want to be occupied and be slaves. They have oral histories of what it was like to be under Russian occupation from their parents, from their grandparents, and ones that were passed down from generations going all the way back to the 1780s when Russia occupied the territories of Ukraine. Like, those stories are being passed down. It's also genocidal. Let's not forget that. One of the policies of war is what we talked about, the looting, the raping, the pillaging. That's a method of war. Genocide is not a method of every single war that has happened. Russians want to rid the earth of Ukrainian language, Ukrainian culture, Ukrainian people, right? And you see this, you hear the stories of them, when they were attacking on a more of a fuller scale, in a much aggressive manner 2 years ago. Yeah, they're attacking city governments, they're attacking military outposts, they're attacking police stations. They were also attacking museums on purpose, deliberately. Museum curators, the head of museums, are on these target lists for Russians. If the Russians were ever able to occupy a Ukrainian city or town, the heads of the police, the heads of the city government, and the heads of museums are on their primary target list, because they're not only just trying to occupy Ukraine, they're trying to get rid of the notion of what Ukraine is. And that is what is genocidal. That is specifically targeting one ethnic group of people or national group of people, however you want to view it, and deliberately not only ending their human life, but their history, their language, their culture, their food, everything about them. This is not just about Russia taking over Ukraine because it believes it has the right to bully its neighbors, or it believes it's Russian land. It's also about genocidal attacks to do that. Russia knows it has to commit genocide in order to end the idea of Ukraine as the nation in and of itself. What it's not going to stop are the people, the Ukrainian diaspora, who has kept the notion of Ukraine alive during the Cold War period. During those Ukrainian communities that were living outside of Ukraine, along with the Ukrainian people inside. Don't get me wrong, I'm not dismissing those people, because they're the ones that were on the ground and putting their lives on the lines, where the diaspora aren't necessarily putting their lives on the line, but they're the ones that are responsible for keeping the culture going, the movement going, how to foment independence, how to declare independence. Look at your neighbor countries like Czechoslovakia, how they did it, for an example, and then, go into that manner. But they're the ones that are sort of like the gatekeepers of the culture to keep it alive. The Russians, when the Soviets occupied the Iron Curtain countries that maintained their independence, like Czechoslovakia or Hungary, they weren't necessarily trying to wipe off the Czech culture, kill the Czech language in a way that is deliberate and out in the open like it's doing now. The citizens of those countries, they were forced to learn Russian. But it didn't mean they had to learn everything in Russian. The street signs were not being turned into Russian language. The Czech, for example, the Czech language and Russian language, they're both Slavic languages from the same tree of languages, but they're completely different letters, and the Czech language is written in the Latin letters, whereas the Russians are in the Cyrillic. So what I'm trying to say is that they didn't go around Czechoslovakia trying to, put the Cyrillic alphabet there, or eliminate the Czech language and make everything Russian. No, Czechs were allowed to keep, and the Slovaks were allowed to keep part of their language, their food, and their customs and cultures. They were just slowly being absorbed into the greater Soviet world by forcing them to learn Russian. And I'm sure the Soviet policies were, eventually we'll start getting rid of the Czech language, or the Slovak language, or the Hungarian language, or the Romanian language, and keep the Russian influence. And to go to the effect of that, I spent a lot of time in the country of Moldova, which was part of the Soviet Union. If you don't know where Moldova is, it is on the Black Sea. It has access to the Black Sea to the south. It borders Ukraine. It's actually a little bit north of Odessa. Part of the country goes into Moldova, and they share a border with Romania. Moldova, that part of Romania, was annexed by the Soviet Union and incorporated into the Soviet Union, much like Ukraine was Estonia, Latvia, Lithuania. Romania was not. Romania was still its independent Romania, the communist part of it, but Moldova wasn't. And the native language of Romania and Moldova is Romanian. But all you have to do is spend some time in Romania, listen to the Romanian language, which to me sounds like dirty Italian, like they're swearing in Italian or something. And then you cross the border into Moldova, and it's still the Romanian language, but most of it is spoken with Russian accents. It is quite the challenge to your ear if you know a little bit of Romanian. The Romanians sort of sing the language. In the Moldovan part, Romanian is more guttural with that Russian influence and accents, and it's crazy to my ears. And I remember being in Moldova and hearing it. I didn't speak Romanian, I still don't, but I could get along with the pleasantries of it. It was like, oh wow. And then I met a guy from Romania in Moldova, and the way he was speaking Romanian, he was singing it, and I'm like, this is way different than all of the other citizens that I've talked to. And this was the rector of the major state university that pretty much had pro-Russian sentiment still. This was back in 2006. Moldova had only been independent for 13 years, and Moldova is on the target list as well. You know, Russia has done a lot of upsetting the Moldovan society, trying to foment insurrection there as well through pro-Russian Moldovan parties. Hasn't been successful there. But if Ukraine, the fate of Moldova is pretty much tied to Ukraine, as is the fate of democracy, really, is tied to Ukraine. And that's what we're fighting for. That's what we support. And for me, it wasn't, I spent a lot of time in Ukraine, like I said, between 2014 and 2019. And getting to know that starting my own programs, this is where we need to be. This is the battle line. I saw it back in 2013. This is the battle lines between democracy and authoritarianism, which is what Russia is, basically. President Putin is only president in name. He's really a czar at this point. But getting to know the people, thinking of the partners I worked with who are in Kyiv, Katya, Oksana, people, Volodymyr, that are living in Kyiv now, and people I met in Lviv, like Zoriana and her family, Volodymyr, who's from Lviv, Roman, people that have been supporters of what we wanted to do in Ukraine, and you think about them and their families. A lot of former students I know have fled, former friends. When I say former students, they're alumni. Eventually they become friends. Some of them you stay in touch with. But you also have met, older people that helped you run the program, or, just you met through common interests. And, the ones that stay, you're like, what are they going through? I had a interview with Yulia. She is now in Zurich in Switzerland. She's, doing finishing her PhD, young, brave journalist who, when Ukraine, before 2022, she did a lot of investigative journalism of what the Russian occupation in the East was like for the people. And I admire her so much because she was so young and putting her life on the line, really, her freedom to talk to these people, to get their stories out there. She's in Zurich. She'd rather be in Ukraine, and she was in Cherniv, which is her hometown, it's about northeast of Kyiv, and it was under crazy attacks, more than Kyiv was back in 2022, 2023. People were out standing for bread and waiting in the line, and missiles were going off, and she was broadcasting from a bunker. We had a little 15-minute interview with her, and just telling me what's going on. My friend Ksenia, who was teaching me Ukrainian, she had fled with her son, her 12-year-old son, to Berlin. And we did a podcast of her leaving, what it was like for her to get from, again, she was in a suburb of Kyiv. No, she was in Kyiv. She went to where her parents were, which were in a suburb, and then she just decided to get out. She went all the way to Lviv, and then she made her way to Berlin, and her stories of being on the trains, the chaos at the train stations, trying to get to the West, the chaos she faced in Poland, and then her settlement in Berlin, where she now resides, and her son is becoming a star volleyball player, from what I understand, in Berlin, and she's very active in the community. Just listening to those stories is what has to get out there, but the support has to be shown. The support of, and seeing these rallies on the pictures I'm seeing on Twitter from, like I said, London, Prague, Rome, Georgia, and Tbilisi is just, while it shouldn't happen because Ukraine should be able to chart its own path towards freedom, it's still necessary to have them. But like I said, if the prognostications of 2 years ago at this time, Kyiv would be gone in 3 days, the Ukrainian nation would be gone in 2 months, we wouldn't be having these rallies or these conversations. The world would have just moved on and accepted the reality of it. Sure, there would have still been fighting within Ukraine. They would have now been called partisans, fighting against the Russian occupation, but there wouldn't be this worldwide support because, as we see, we're in a fatigue situation now with Ukraine, even in providing them aid. And I'm hoping that even if somehow this aid gets turned down, that Biden just says, fuck it, give them what they need. And give them what they want, give them what they need, draw down the stocks as much as I can, and defend this nation. Because if not, American troops will be on the ground in NATO countries, in Poland, in the Baltics in the coming years. Especially if President Biden is reelected. God forbid he should not be. He's reelected, but doesn't support Ukraine. We will have NATO troops and American troops back in Europe conducting a war in Europe. It will. That will be the situation if Ukraine falls. If somehow Trump becomes president again, I don't think he's going to defend NATO countries. I think he's a pro-Russian asset. He will, again, he's a zero-sum game person. He's not a leader. He's a zero-sum game person. You're either the strongest or you're the weakest. The strongest will prevail. Remember that Trump, in 1987, when he returned from Moscow, he said we shouldn't fight the Soviet Union, the United States. We should join the Soviet Union. Not join it in the country part, but join them in agreeing upon of never letting nuclear weapons get in the hands of other countries. He even mentioned we should have bombed France. We should have attacked France because France got the nuclear secrets, or somehow they were given to Pakistan. I don't know the whole story, but he was like, we should bomb them for doing that. Right? A NATO ally at the time. Right? So there's no doubt in my mind, after this was written in 1987, he hasn't stopped believing in those policies. He hasn't stopped being pro-Russian in his sentiment or sees the world view as Putin does, which is basically let's go back to empires and spheres of influence pre-World War I. He doesn't see that. He just sees economic gain to stay in power, to get rid of all the lawsuits against him, and to gain some economic superiority. Let Russia have Ukraine, and if I let them have it, then give me access to the lithium deposits, access to the grain, access to we don't use coal, we have coal here, in a way that will benefit just me and my companies and all my cronies. And that's what they're sort of angling to do. It's been an hour. I wanted to do this podcast just to get out my own thoughts and recollections. I did make a prediction 2 years ago that Russia would seek to at least cut off the access to the water. And after and it's in a podcast, apparently, that the good Dr. Ibrahim reminds me of. I'll try to find that and play that. I'm not sure how relevant it is to get it back out there. But to me, that's what you see the success of Ukraine today being the fact that the grain shipments or the exports of Ukrainian grain and probably sunflower oil in there, but we just focus on the grain because when we see a picture of grain shipments, we know that's food. We know that's going to feed countries around the world. And that economic power, wherever this grain is being shipped, if they had pro-Russian sentiments, the Ukrainians are getting the grain to us, maybe we don't need Russia anymore. I'm talking about countries in Africa where there's a pro-Russian sentiment being built there for a variety of reasons. But that's the idea, that if you see that the food is coming out, and it's up to pre-war levels, coming out of Odessa because of these brave Ukrainian soldiers that defended Snake Island, first of all, liberated it, and then the Ukrainian naval drone pilots. They're attacking these Russian ships and sinking them in a way that was with not one man on the sea. At least on a boat, attacking the Russian ships directly. They're doing it via remote control with these kamikaze drones that are sinking Russian warships and is able to pull off some of the pressure on Odessa and missiles being launched from the Black Sea and allowing the grain shipments to come through. Ukraine is winning. It's winning. It just needs more support, and it needs a ton of support from around the world. The European allies need to start producing their weapons, not only to defend themselves against Russia, but to send to Ukraine, because that is also defending their nations. That is what we need. We need this bill to go through in the House of Representatives. We need 4 Republicans to side with the Democrats and push the aid through that gets to Ukraine and allows Ukraine as a nation to survive, to allow you to still defend democracy and freedom that we talk about. It's been the Matt Kwazaborski Show. Remember to inspire the inspiration. Do not wait for the inspiration to inspire you. And Slava Ukraine, Heroyam Slava.
Ой, у лузі червона калина похилилася, чогось наша славна Україна зажурилася, а ми тую червону калину підіймемо, а ми нашу славну Україну розвеселимо.
Thanks again to all the loyal listeners out there. Slava Ukraine, Heroyam Slava. Have a great day. If you know Ukrainian, invite them to coffee. Just check on them today. See how they're doing. Maybe invite them for a drink, maybe a meal. Whatever it is, go visit. If you don't know Ukrainians, go support, go to a church, go to a cultural house. Do what you got to do to show your support today and every day for Ukraine. It's been the Matt Kwazaborski Show, live and direct from Arlington, Virginia. Again, remember to inspire the inspiration. Do not wait for the inspiration to inspire you.